Hey everybody, and welcome back to my Activators Guide series. So today we're going to look at the actual activation, and we're going to start by looking at spotting. There are a number of different ways you can do this. Some of them require internet access, some of them don't. Some will require specialized equipment, some of them won't. There are other ways to do this as well. I'm just showing you some. So you can self-spot or you can be spotted by other ops. In fact, the first activation I ever did was a single sideband activation, and I just started calling CQ and waited for someone to spot me. I wouldn't recommend that. It did take a little bit of time before I got spotted, but once you get spotted, the calls start coming in pretty quickly. But relying on someone else to spot you can be a little iffy. Self-spotting, if you have internet access, this is the easiest way to do this. So on the Parks on the Air website, you can do this one of two ways. You can either click the little hamburger menu and click Add Spot, or at the bottom of the spots page, you can click this plus and put in your call sign, your frequency in kilohertz. So let's say 7041. And let's say I'm at kilo 10082, which is the park I activated this morning. And I might say CW, or you could say single sideband, or you could say FT8, or whatever mode you happen to be using, JS8, call, RIDI, whatever you want to do. You know, put whatever mode you're using in there. Now, I don't want to spot myself because I'm not at a park. But that's how you would do it on the Parks on the Air website. And again, remember, this requires internet access. All right? You can also do it on the SOTA Watch website. So this is where all the SOTA spots are. So you'll see an add spot button right here, and it's the same idea. You put your activating call sign, the association and the summit code, so K2EJT, W2GC-112 or whatever, your frequency, all right? And this one you're going to do in megahertz, not kilohertz, so you're going to put the decimal in. POTA, you don't. SOTA, you do. Mode, pretty obvious, right? Any comments you want, and then you would click Add Spot, all right? That's pretty straightforward. Now, you can also get spotted by the reverse beacon network. So we talked about the reverse beacon network in my last video. And you saw how you can call CQ and this will pick you up. Now, if you have scheduled your activation ahead of time, either the Parks on the Air or Summits on the Air, when you get picked up by the reverse beacon network, it will spot you automatically. This works for both CW and digital modes, FT8 primarily. I don't know what other digital modes it works on. I haven't tried, but I do know it works on FT8. Now, this requires you to have schedule your activation ahead of time on the appropriate website. Okay, so you have to have a little bit of forethought. You can't go out on the fly and do this. Unless, of course, you have internet access, but in which case, if I've got an internet access, I can just schedule myself directly on the POTA or SOTA websites. So for me, if I know I'm going someplace where there's limited or no cell service, because I'm primarily a CW operator, I will schedule my activation ahead of time, and then as soon as I hit the reverse beacon network, it auto spots me. Okay. So the next thing we can use is we can actually use APRS. So there's something called AP Spot. All right. So you can do this with APRS, SMS, or WinLink. I primarily use this with APRS because I can hit quite a few digis from around here. And so this kind of walks through what it does and how to set it up. So it explains what it is. All right. It's basically spotting via APRS. All right. How it works. It supports worldwide flora and fauna, SOTA, POTA, and silos on the air. What does it send to? So it tells you what it sends, each thing it sends to. How do you spot? So you can go through how you actually do this. Okay, so if you want to see how to actually do it, it'll walk you through step by step all the different commands. All right, if you want to get spots, if you want to post a spot, all right, and it shows you APRS, WinLink, and SMS. Now, this is something you have to set up ahead of time. Again, you've got to have it ready to go. Once it's set up, you can use it on the fly. But remember, I do need the ability to hit either an APRS digi or a WinLink station. APRS, generally over VHF, you're going to be line of sight. There is HF APRS on 30 meters, but you know, it's a little, HF APRS is a little bit wonky, all right? But this works pretty well. You can also do it via SMS. So if you're someplace where you have cell service, but you don't have internet access, you can do it via SMS as well, All right, so you've got a lot of different options for this. I've used this to fairly good effect when I know I can hit a digi, because digipeaters generally have better coverage than cell towers do. There are places where I'll have absolutely no cell service, but I can hit a digi. Also remember, you can hit the digi on the International Space Station. So, and I've done this before, you can spot yourself via the International Space Station using APRS. So even if you don't have a digi in range, a terrestrial one, you can absolutely use the International Space Station to do it. From there, we've got something called SOTA. So SOTA pretty cool. SOTA can be used a couple different ways. This can either be used self-spotting standalone. All you need is your phone. So you can use your phone either hooked up through a cable directly to your computer, or sorry, to your radio, or you can actually just hold your phone up to the mic on the radio and key it up. And what it does is it sends your spot over FT8. So it sends that spot out and is picked up by the skimmer and then spots you. Now, again, there's software you have to download on your phone. There's both Android and iOS. It works pretty well. You pick your band, your mode, all your location stuff. You play the FT8 audio and it keys up and you transmit that over the air and it spots you. It's pretty neat. You can also do it with a Garmin InReach. All right, so I've actually done this with my InReach. You can send an email to the AP spot. I'm sorry, not the AP spot, the SOTA email address to spot yourself. So I've done that using my InReach Mini as well. So you've got a couple of different options with this. This one's nice because you don't need anything other than your phone. You've already got your HF radio with you. All you're doing is you're sending tones from your phone over the radio you're already using to spot yourself. So this is kind of a cool way to do it as well. It doesn't require any infrastructure at all, right? Even APRS, we require digipeaters and stuff. This doesn't require anything. This just requires your phone and your radio, and it sends that tone out and is picked up by the skimmers out on the internet, and you're spotted appropriately. I guess it does need some infrastructure in that obviously the skimming network needs to be working. But as long as that's working, this is actually a really, really cool way to spot yourself or spot other people. All right, so that is SOTA, which is a really, really neat way to go at this. Let's talk for just a minute about choosing the right band before we go out. So when we choose bands, so what bands are best for each time of day, season, and conditions? Obviously, this stuff's going to change, right? I mean, if you're talking time of day, if it's the middle of the day, you probably don't want to be using 80 meters. Conversely, if it is midnight, 10 meters is probably not your best choice. I'm assuming that most of you probably know what bands work when. If you don't, there's a lot of good information out there on that stuff. That goes a little bit beyond the scope of this video. But make sure you're choosing a band where you're actually going to get contacts, right? If 10 meters isn't really open, you probably shouldn't rely on a 10 meter activation to get the job done, unless you're looking for a challenge, right? I mean, if you're really looking for contacts, for instance, I do a lot of early shift and late shift activations. 40 meters for me and maybe 30 those are sort of my bread and butter bands at that time of day. You just get bombarded with calls at early shift or late shift on 40 meters. In the middle of the day, I'm probably going to be on 20, maybe 17 or 15. If the bands are really good, I might use 12 or 10. But generally 40, 30, 20 are kind of my bread and butter bands. Those are the ones I use the most. But again, pick a band that is good for the time of day, the conditions. It changes via season too, right? I mean, some bands are better in the winter than they are in the summer. Some bands are better, like I said, earlier in the day than later in the day. So keep all those things in mind. We talked about checking band conditions in our previous video. And we talked about vocap, and one of the things you can do, we talked about this in the last video, is I'll just punch in so I've got my mode CW, I'm 5 watts. I set all my antennas to just dipoles. And then you can, if you want to see what propagation is going to be like, you can just drag the pin. So let's say I want to see what it's like getting down to Florida. You're probably talking, let's see, what do we got? Maybe 17, 15, 20, those are probably my best bets. You know, if I wanted to go out, let's say, to Wisconsin, pretty similar. What if we wanted to go out to Colorado? Well, now we're looking a longer band, right? So we're going to probably talk in like 12 meters right now is probably our best bet out to Colorado. If I was trying to make the trip out to, let's say, San Jose, it's going to be tough. Probably my best bet's going to be 17 meters. All right. So this is a really good tool for that. You know, if you're trying to work DX, let's say I'm trying to get calls over in, let's say, Spain. I work a lot of Spain. So let's say I'm trying to get into Spain this time of day. It's not great, but 15 meters is probably going to be my best bet. All right. So I probably got about a 50 or 60% chance of making that QSO from New York to Spain on 15 meters. So when you go to choose a band, keep that stuff in mind. The other thing we need to look at is what frequencies will your antenna operate on, right? Don't pick a band that your antenna won't work on. If you're using an end-fed half wave that's good on 40, 20, and 15, don't try to operate on 30 or 12, right? Or 10. Most of those antennas will work on 10, but it's usually the SWRs are usually a little high, right? But if you're using, let's say, a 20-meter dipole, you're stuck on 20 meters. Make sure that the antenna that you're choosing will operate on those frequencies. Or make sure you're running a radio that's got a tuner and then a good, like an end-fed random wire or something where it's very agile and you can jump band to band in real time. I did that yesterday. I had the KX2 out with a 9-to-1 end-fed random wire, and I went all up and down the bands. So, you know, if you want to be able to swap bands easily, that's probably the easiest route, right? If you're using a radio that doesn't have a tuner or you're not using an external tuner, you need to make sure that the antenna you're using is resonant on the frequencies you're going to activate on. And then the last thing we need to look at here are what are your band privileges, right? Make sure that you're operating within the bands that you are allowed to operate in. So I'm hoping everyone has seen this before, at least everybody in the US. This is the band allocation chart. So even if you're a technician, right, obviously we can use all the UHF, VHF stuff, but we can also use the bottom portion of 10 meters, so 28 to 28.5. We can do CW and we can do single sideband in here from 28.3 to 28.5. So even if you're a technician, if 10 meters is open, you can do CW, digital, and single sideband all on 10 meters. If you know CW, technicians also have privileges on 15 meters and 40 meters. So even if you're only a technician, between 15 meters and 40 meters, you can work all of the United States and DX just with those two bands. So even if you've only got a technician license, if you know CW, you're pretty well golden, right? Obviously, it's going to be more advantageous to at least get your general so you get access to all of the bands. And, you know, ultimately extra. I don't even have extra yet. I'm far too lazy for that. Eventually I will. But at least if you get your general, that opens up a large chunk of the bands that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. So again, make sure you're paying attention to the band allocation that you're allowed to use. And again, this is going to change country to country and licensing structure to licensing structure. I'm talking specifically to U.S. operators. If you're an operator in a different country or a different region, obviously your band plans are going to be different. So make sure you pay attention to the band plans that you have access to. Oh, I forgot about 80 meters. Technicians also have CW on 80 meters as well. So again, even if you're only a technician, you can do obviously all the UHF, VHF stuff. You can do 10 meters, you can do CW digital and single sideband. 15 meters, you can do CW. 40 meters, you can do CW. And 80 meters, you can do CW. So you have a lot of different options. So with that being said, we'll come back in just a second, and let's talk a little bit about actually calling CQ. So we'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about calling CQ. First things first, understand that all contacts count. You don't have to call CQ POTA or whatever and only work park or contacts hunting your park. You can have 10 contacts with anybody. You can have 10 rag chews. You could hunt 10 other parks. It doesn't matter. You could just call CQ generally and talk to whoever. As long as you make 10 contacts from that park, it counts. Now, you're going to get a whole lot more callers if you call CQ parks in the air or CQ summits in the air and spot yourself. But you don't have to. Any QSO counts. As long as you have a valid QSO, it counts. On phone, generally you're going to call CQ POTA, CQ POTAs, CQ parks on the air. Then you're going to spell your call sign out phonetically. So I'm Kilo 2 Echo Juliet Tango. So I'd say CQ POTA, CQ POTA, CQ Parks in the Air. Kilo 2 Echo Juliet Tango calling CQ Parks in the Air or CQ POTA. All right. On CW, generally you're just going to send CQ POTA DE and then your call sign and then the letter K. I usually send it twice. So CQ, CQ, POTA, DE, K2EJT, K2EJT, K. If your radio has memories in it, I would recommend you program one of those memories for your CQ so you don't have to call CQ over and over again. On FT8, it's pretty straightforward. On FT8, you adjust down here in your CQ box. You'll see I've got POTA in there. Normally, when you open this up, it just says CQ and then your call sign. You just put POTA as the CQ modifier in there, you're good to go. You hit transmit, call CQ, and FT8 does the work for you. And I'm not really going to go through the FT8 QSO because it does it for you, right? You just hit transmit, and it goes through the whole QSO itself. So you don't really need to worry about any sort of protocol involved here. You don't even need to put the POTA in here. You could just call CQ on FT8 and work whoever, as long as you get 10 contacts, it's valid. But you'll get more people hunting you if you put the POTA in there. It's like if I got a grid tracker, you'll see right here, WA9TT, right? He's at Park Kilo 9785. So I've got grid tracker filtering for Parks on the Air. So if I work him, that will go from shaded purple to outlined purple, which tells me I've already worked him. You'll see he disappeared because he's currently working somebody. But FT8 is pretty straightforward. I mean, if you work FT8, you know how this stuff works. I probably shouldn't have to tell you. So let's go ahead and let's talk about the actual exchange. Okay, so on phone, generally the caller will send their call sign phonetically, like I said. When you get calls in, pick a call to work. If only one caller is calling you, work that one call. If you get a partial, ask them to repeat, right? So you might hear a number or a letter or two. Ask them to repeat, call sign with 3 or call sign ending in Zulu, whatever. Repeat their call back to them and then give them a signal report. So I might say K2EJT or Kilo 2 Echo Juliet Tango, you are 5-7 in New York. They'll respond to you in kind. All right, so they'll respond to you with your signal report and their QTH. They may add other info also. Feel free to exchange or not exchange in any conversation you want, right? It's your activation. You run it at your pace. Generally, I prefer to use plain English in QSOs, with the exception of QRZ. I see QRZ when I'm looking for callers. I generally don't use other Q codes much. I will say QSL occasionally, but usually only if the other operator does. And CW, it's a whole different ball of wax. But on phone, I generally like to use plain English for the most part. It's not going to hurt anything if you use Q codes, but I generally like to use plain English better. And what I'll do here in a minute is I will show you examples of what this looks like. Now on CW, callers will send in calls. So you're going to do the same thing as above. You're going to pick out a call sign and work it. If you only get a partial, ask for it back. So if you heard N5 and you missed the rest of it, either you missed the rest of their call or you had multiple callers in a pileup and you were able to pull out that N5, just send N5 question mark. They will send their call back to you. Once you get a full call, repeat it. All right. For instance, like this is my old call sign, KE2ACY. So if I was working KE2ACY, I might say KE2ACY, good morning, thank you, you are 599, New York, back to you. All right, BK signifies swapping ops in this instance. So we're sending it back from one operator to the other. They'll then respond in kind. So they'll say, BK, thank you, good morning, you are 599, Florida, back to you. They may repeat things twice, they may not, it depends on the operator. They may also include other things like fine business or good luck, or they might tell you there's QSB or QRM. Some operators will send their name. You'll see that in a minute on the QSO that I'm going to show you. You're going to hear I send the op's name to him, and he sends my name back to me. We've worked each other several hundred times, so we know each other's first name by heart. If you feel like rag chewing, have at it. Again, it's your activation. I tend to go for brevity, and I move pretty fast. It's your activation, though. You control the pace of the activation. If you want to rag chew, feel free. If you've got a pile up, I probably wouldn't. If it's a pile up, just go through the standard QSO protocol, whether it's on phone or on CW. Just, call sign, RST, QTH, thank you 7-3, move on to your next caller. Now, like I said, if it's a slow-paced activation, you've got time, and you want to rag chew, feel free. It's entirely up to you. I generally like to move fast and be fairly efficient. And like I said, on FT8, hit the CQ button, let the computer sort it out. The computer's going to handle the QSO protocol for you, and then you just log those calls. We'll talk about logging here in a little bit. Okay, so let me interject a couple of just clips here. One will be of me calling CQ on CW and a QSO on CW, but the first one will be a complete phone contact from me calling CQ right through the end of the contact. So I'll play the phone one first so you can see how that sounds. Then I'll do the CW one, and I'll put subtitles in the CW one so you can understand what's being sent. And then when we come back, we'll talk about some of the other things you need to consider when you're working a pile. So we'll be back in just a minute. CQ POTA, CQ POTA, CQ Parks on the air. Kilo 2, Echo Juliet Tango calling CQ for Parks on the air.
Whiskey Victor 8, Delta Oscar Hotel.
Whiskey Victor 8, Delta Oscar Hotel. I've got you about a 5-9 here in the park, QSL.
QSL, I got you about a 5-8, Whiskey Victor, West Virginia. Copy?
Roger, Roger, the 5-8 into West Virginia. I appreciate you hunting me today. Good luck at 7-3.
73.
QRZ. Jim. Nebraska. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the activation is actually going to be like, some of the things you might have to deal with. So now that we know what calling CQ is going to look like and what a basic QSO is going to look like, let's talk a little bit about working pileups. So pileups can either be fun or frustrating or scary, depending on your comfort level and your skills. This is one of those things that more experienced operators kind of enjoy. When you're new, pileups can be a little bit scary, but don't let them scare you. They're actually a blast once you get used to working pileups. Phone pileups can get rowdy. You'll have people yelling over each other, people calling multiple times, people, trailing on forever. Try not to encourage bad behavior. You'll get people who will be tailgaters. So they'll, before you even call QRZ, they're calling their call sign out. Or you'll get tailgaters or tail enders who, they're at that very last person who calls. The pile calls and then they wait 3 seconds and then send their call. Now, sometimes that works. I hate to encourage that behavior, but sometimes it's the only way you can get hurt, especially if you're not running a ton of power. If you're QRP or something, a lot of times you got to play games to be able to get through. But try not to encourage bad behavior. If you constantly just take that last call, that's going to encourage people to wait really long. Try to pull parts of call signs out. Do the best you can do. CW pileups can be a nightmare if everyone zero beats you. So if you don't know what zero beating is, that's when everybody calls you on the same frequency. So if I'm activating on 7.057 and everyone calls me at exactly 7.057, if you get 10 to 15 stations calling you all at the same time, it's just a constant beep. You can't pull anything out. So try to use some transmit clarifier, some exit. Change your transmit frequency a little bit. Go up or down, 50 to 100 hertz. Just enough to make your tone different than everybody else's. So yours will stand out. You'll get a pile of zero beats, and one person will be off by, let's say, 60 hertz, and you'll be able to pull their call out of the pile clear as a bell. And you'll if you listen on CW, you'll hear people doing this. You can tell those are the people that know what they're doing, because if ever, like I said, if everybody calls you at your frequency, it just turns into a disaster. Now, one thing you've got to keep in mind is if you are running CW, you're going to need to keep your filter open wide enough to be able to hear those people. I don't like to go narrower than 500 hertz unless I have to. Yeah, you might get some QRM from adjacent signals, depending on how good your receiver is and how good your filtering is. But if you go too tight, you're going to miss people. Now, if you need to tighten it up to finish the conversation, you can do that, but just make sure you open it back up when you're done, all right? Ask for as many repeats as you need. They want to work you. Remember, you're the DX. The stations want to work you. So they're going to be as patient as they need to get their call through to you. You know, on phone, if they're way down in the weeds, you might have to ask for it 3 or 4 times. If it's CW and they're coming at you at 1,000,000 miles an hour, there's a bunch of QSB or there's a bunch of calls one on top of the other. Just keep asking, all right? You know, so like you might send K3 ? And wait for those K3 calls to come back, okay? One thing I'll tell you on CW is if you get a huge pile up and it's zero beating real bad and you can't pull anything out, after the pile dies down, throw out a random letter or number and see who responds. So you get a huge pile up, zero beat, you can't pull anything out of it, just send like 4 ? Or N. I usually don't do an N or an A or a K or W, but maybe like Z ? Or B ? See if you can pull a call that way, because somebody's going to respond, or it'll be fewer stations that do, and then work from there. Dealing with QRM can be frustrating. If it's intentional, your best course of action is to try and ignore it. There are people out there who their sole purpose in life is to try to annoy other people. They're those grumpy old codgers that sit in their shack and, you know, yell at clouds and that kind of stuff. If somebody is intentionally QRMing you, just work through them. Don't even acknowledge their existence. Just keep going. If you really can't, you can QSY, you can change frequencies, but generally, if they don't disrupt your activation, they'll go away and find somebody else to bother. Like I said, if you call them out, it just sort of encourages their behavior. Work the pile and ignore the idiots. Like I said, they'll go troll somebody else if they don't get a rise out of you. If it's not intentional, consider changing frequencies, right? So if it's QRM that's from some device or something nearby that's on a specific frequency or multiples of that frequency, just consider changing frequency to get away from that QRM, right? Be careful not to go too narrow, like I said, especially on CW, if you narrow your filters to try to get away from that QRM. So if you got QRM just adjacent to you and you narrow your filter up a little bit, that's okay. Don't go too narrow or you may miss people who are calling you off frequency. All right, so now let's just talk for a minute about logging software, what you actually have to log and how to log your uploads. So there are a lot of different logging softwares you can use. You can log with a pencil and paper. I do that when I'm in the field and I'm doing CW. I can't do electronic logging while I'm doing CW. My brain just won't let me. If I'm doing phone, I log on hammers while I'm doing a phone activation because I can do that. If you're logging with pencil and paper, you're either going to need to enter the info in the software when you get home or directly enter on the website. So if you're going to do direct entry, so here is the Parks on the Air website. If I click the hamburger menu, no, I'm sorry, I lied. If I click my call sign and I click log uploads, I can either upload an ADIF from, let's say, Hammers or some other logging software, or you can do manual log entry. And if you click manual log entry, you can just enter the time, the call sign, the state, add entry, and just go from there. And this will populate with your calls. In fact, this is how I logged my activation this morning. I normally use Hammers. This is how I did it this morning. On the Summits on the Air website, you're going to go to Database. And then once that opens up, you're going to click Uploads and then Add Activation. And then the same thing. You put your call sign in, the Summit code, click Add QSO. You put your information in. When you're done, you submit it. I'm not going to put things in here because, again, I'm not doing an activation. But this is where you would do it. It's the same idea. Okay. So if you're logging with software, there's a lot. Hammers, N3FJP, you can use N1MM, FLE, Fast Log Entry, Log for Old Men. Be sure your logs are correct before uploading them. Verify that your call signs are correct, the times are correct, the bands are correct, the modes are correct. So at home, I use Log for Old Men. I don't use this when I'm doing POTA. It's way too complicated for Parks in the Air. I've found for me, hammers is the easiest thing to do. So this is my activation from yesterday. So you just put their call sign in, RST if you want. I honestly don't even bother logging the RSTs. I write them down in my paper log, but I don't put them in here because it's not required. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Their park, if it's a park to park, you can put it in there if you want, but you don't have to. The Parks in the Air website will sort that out automatically for you. So if you work another park, you don't have to enter their park here. Okay? You can if you want to, but you definitely don't have to. The time, you can pause this and enter the time if you want. So when I log on paper, I come home, I pause this, and then I enter the correct time. Over here, you can enter your band information, your mode information, call sign and park information. I don't normally put a frequency in there. I don't normally put power in there. I did today. You don't need to, all right? And then down here, you can see here's all our calls. All right, and here's a map of the QSOs. So it'll map this out, which is kind of neat. So you can see where all your QSOs went, right? So I can zoom in and you can see what the band looked like, where I was getting out to. You can see most of my contacts were to the west. I only had one to the east of me. It kind of depends on how the bands are and who's awake. This was pretty early. I didn't get a lot of West Coast stuff because this was fairly early in the morning, and I was on 20 meters. So I probably could have gotten some DX, but I didn't get any DX working me yesterday. So anyway, that's what the map looks like. The POTA spots is exactly what it sounds like. It shows you the current Parks in the Air spots. I don't really use this, but this will show you who's currently spotted on POTA. All right, so that's what hammers looks like. So what's actually required for the log? So on Parks in the Air, you need the park, the date, the time, the call sign, the mode, and the band. That's it. SOTA's pretty much the same information. If it's a summit to summit, you do need their summit identifier. So unlike Parks in the Air, which will sort it out for you, summits in the air won't. So you will need to copy that summit identifier so that you can put that in your log if it's a summit to summit to get credit for it. Log uploads. You can upload logs. So you can do CSVs, ADIFs, FLE. So if you're using fast log entry, you can do it from here. You can do ADIF files or a CSV. On Parks in the Air, you can, right here, if you click right here, you can select. So there's my activation yesterday. Select that and upload it. Pretty simple. When you're done, it'll populate down here and show you your activations. And that's pretty much that. SOTA, it's the same kind of deal. So when you're done, you'll see your logs, all right, and all your data and things from there. So that's kind of what the activation is going to look like. All right, so like I said, get yourself spotted either by spotting yourself using the internet or the RBN or APRS or SOTAmate, or you can rely on other people to spot you, but that can be kind of ugly. Make sure you choose the right band based on the time of day, the conditions, where you're going to get the most contacts, what your band privileges are, those kind of things. And then start calling CQ. Like I said, any contact counts, all right? Go through your basic exchange. If you get a pile up, work through it. Do the best you can at working the pile. Thin that pile out as best you can. Don't get intimidated, all right? The first time you get a pile up, it can be a little scary. Don't worry about it. Those people want to work you. They will stick around, and if they don't, they might ditch for a while, go hunt somebody else, and they might come back to you when the pile up dies down. But don't be intimidated by pile ups. Like I said, if you're dealing with QRM, if it's intentional, try to ignore them. Don't feed the trolls. If it's non-intentional QRM, you can narrow that filter up a little bit, but be careful not to go too narrow or you'll miss calls, or just QSY. Like I said, when we're logging, you can log with pencil and paper, or you can log using software. Just understand that if you're logging with pencil and paper, you're either going to have to enter it into software to upload an ADIF file or an FLE file, or you're going to have to do the manual entry on the Parks in the Air or Summits in the Air website. And then finally, really all you need to log is the park or summit identifier, the date, the time, the call, the mode, the band. And like I said, if it's SOTA, you're going to have to get the summit identifier if it is a summit to summit. Okay? So that's pretty much it for the activation. Now, the next video we do in this series will be the last one, and it's going to kind of be an after activation report. So we're going to look at what worked, what didn't, what things we might change. I'll talk about some of the things that I've run into when I've done activations that I probably should have thought of beforehand, and things you might want to consider when you're done with your first activation. If you've already done an activation and it didn't go that great, make sure you do this. Make sure you go through that information and go, okay, why didn't this go the way I thought it was going to go? So hopefully you found that helpful. And like I said, the next one we'll wrap things up with an after activation report. So with that being said, I really appreciate everybody watching. Until the next one, 7-3.